cheering for them. Oh, keep it up. Okay. Because I know it's all you.
Howdy, how are you?
I'm just saying, it feels pretty Monday today.
Pretty Monday? Yeah, my morning wasn't that way, but the afternoon kind of went that way.
Yeah.
And now it's better again, so.
Okay. Good. You got this. Thanks for putting this together.
Yeah,
You've been doing that a lot lately. Yeah.
it's okay. Takes more time than a person would think, though, to go back and remember what you did 10 or 20 years ago and try and present it in a way that makes sense now as compared to during the discussion then. So.
All right, I'm going to ask everybody to take their seat. We are going to get the work session meeting started right on time here at 5:30. I'm going to have to rouse in my own commissioners, it looks like here. Whew, Al, roll call.
Benson.
Here.
Brunig. Here. Hanoff. I'll come back to him. Johnson.
Present.
Minor.
Here.
Schramm.
Here.
Villanueva.
Present.
Weber.
Here.
Mayor Moser.
Here.
City Manager Leon.
Here.
And we'll pause for just a second. We got two more that will be present. Mr. Hanoff, are you present? Yep. And City Attorney Denherter?
Yep.
All right. Number 2 under our work session is the time for public appearance. Is there anybody in the public that wishes to address the commission on something not on the work session agenda tonight? Seeing no movement, then we will move on to number 3, which is actually why we're meeting and starting at 5:30 tonight. Our topic for the work session is the sign ordinance discussion, so I will turn it over to City Manager Leon to get us started, and then I'm sure she'll be turning it over to Mr. Mingo.
I will, Honorable Mayor, members of the commission, and the public. As you know, we talked about the sign ordinance under a public appearance a number of weeks ago, and put together a history and a memo for you and for the public to look at. We also have a PowerPoint here for the benefit of anyone who would like to see some visuals of what we're actually talking about. Sometimes it's difficult to put into just words what we're actually talking about. So we have some visuals here. Dave Mingo was part of the process when the sign ordinance was put in place, so he really does have all the history. He's going to walk you through the work session, which will combine elements of the memo that he put together for us. We're starting early because this will take a little bit of time to go through, then leave you time for discussion. What we're looking for tonight from you is if you have any direction for us as staff regarding how you want to move forward on the ordinance. So with that, Mr. Mingo, I will hand it off to you to guide us through this PowerPoint.
Thank you.
Dave, quick question for you. Do you want questions during the presentation if it's pertinent, or would you rather people jot them down and wait?
Our crowd is small enough, I think, that we can do that. The only thing I was going to emphasize from the beginning is that if we start getting into questions that require me to try and remember something from 2003 or 2013, I'd ask your permission to be able to go back and do some additional research. If it's something that's not answered in the memo or in this presentation, I have general knowledge of, the processes then, and then, Brad Beese and Michael Hofer are kind of more responsible for the day-to-day administration anymore, so they have more specific field knowledge than I do at this time. So I'll let you know if it's something I need a little time to get back to you on.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so this was an interesting exercise for me to go back and dig through the notes and processes that occurred, and as I considered the 2013 sign ordinance rewrite and referred back all the way to the 2003 comprehensive plan, I became, or remembered, I guess, over that 10-year span then from 2003 to 2013, what the comp plan actually said about signs and aesthetics too. So that's included in this presentation also. So let's start with the origins of the current ordinance. We did have a sign ordinance prior to 2013. It was difficult to administer and unwieldy in a lot of ways, and it required permits for way too many things. So it got to the point where it was a little bit of a free-for-all, and part of the comp planning discussion was, let's make things easier for the public and easier for staff to be able to drive by and know if there's something that is or is not in compliance. So the current version of the sign ordinance started with the 2003 comprehensive plan, and that process was over 18 months. Some of you, Charlie, may have been involved in that process way back when. That was a 48-member committee that represented a diverse cross-section of the community. We had high school students on it. We had business professionals. We had manufacturing employees. We also had planning commission and city commission involved in that. There was a number of open houses and visioning sessions that we called charrettes back then. So that was a fairly significant process. That plan, as you can see on the city's website, if you go there and check it out, actually includes an entire chapter on the visual city and the important role that aesthetics play in the growth of the community. And there's a quote from it, I won't read it to you, but essentially what was decided at that point in time is aesthetics are important, and that will promote further private investment and development and good economic decision, or adding to economic value of the community. And there was also discussions with specific reference to visual clutter, and that was signs and then things beyond signs that, code enforcement, other abatement issues. So fast forward, as we're going through the implementation process of the comprehensive plan, that included all kinds of things beyond just signs. So we had done some rezonings based on the plan. We had done some transportation corridor projects based on the plan. We're in the implementation schedule, 2011, 2012, 2013 come along. It's time to consider what the community wants to see as far as sign ordinances or any changes, if there would be some. So the goal at that point in time was to streamline the process through a series of regulated exemptions, because prior to 2013, everything, banners, streamers, everything, balloons, everything technically required a sign ordinance. Well, did we have the capacity or a permit for the sign? They were considered signs and require a permit. Did we have the capacity to track every single one of those down? Absolutely not. So we tried to work with people when things got a little bit out of hand, but essentially there are many things that didn't comply with the sign ordinance or weren't permitted that were out there. So one of the things that we talked about in that process was, well, if we think it's okay, let's just exempt it. Then the businesses don't even have to get a permit for that. Well, it's not just a free-for-all at that point, it's a regulated exemption. So if a businessman or a staff is driving by, you can clearly see what is or would not be compliant, and if it's one of the exempt things, that's great, and that provided a lot of flexibility for the business community also. Second goal was to reduce some of the less desirable types of signage, helping with the overall image of the community, going back to that visual city chapter reference in the comp plan. And then the third thing we ran into was to modernize the language, including terminology that reflected the current technology and also federal case law at the time that had been occurring. The timing was really good in 2013 for that because, again, as mentioned, the prior ordinance had become unwieldy just from an administrative standpoint, and that state and federal case law had evolved to the point where there was more clear direction as far as what any governmental entity could regulate as far as what signs could be or couldn't be. So that case law and those changes nationally, not just Yankton, included time, place, and manner. In other words, we can regulate signs based on the duration of placement, or even seasonal if you wanted to do that. You could that's a time application. Place, location on the site, manner, type, size. The thing we couldn't do anymore that our prior ordinance did was regulate specifically by content. So prior ordinances to much of the federal case law and state case law talked about differences based on what the words on the sign said, and are they permitted if they say these things as compared to these things. That is not, we're not able to do that anymore based on those court cases. The rewrite included a number of opportunities for public engagement, planning commission meetings, city commission meetings, and the standard ordinance adoption process. As you know, that takes a couple meetings. So we had some input at that point. The rewrite also, which was interesting and led to a significant amount of discussion, included a representative of the ISA. And so the ISA is an International Sign Association. That's a organization that represents sign contractors nationwide, probably internationally even. So they're looking out to protect sign contractors and the businesses they serve. The process also included a kind of a fun at the time visual preference survey. So we took 35 different images and had people in this room with ranking sheets that looked kind of like this. This is just the first 10 of them. And we'd go through and what's your first impression when you see this sign or when you see this image? Not just the sign, but the whole streetscape visual. What's your first impression? And people checked the boxes, and those rankings were used to help guide the language in the ordinance also, significantly. The rewrite, and also the process for the rewrite and also the process of the comp plan did determine that Yankton wanted to emphasize aesthetics, so that is very true. Aesthetics are a big part of how we regulate our streetscape, and that is more so than many other communities, by choice. Participates in the community engagement process has commented that as long as the ordinance is community-wide, then it isn't benefiting anybody disproportionately or putting anybody at a disadvantage disproportionately. So we had a lot of discussion about what's the purpose of a sign, and it got a little philosophical at times too. And some of the folks in the room at the time who tend to be more that way, what is the purpose of a sign? What is this message trying to convey? Does it have to be important to a few people, or should it be important to the community as a whole? So we had a fun little exercise of also trying to determine, what's the purpose of a sign. So we had the strange and sometimes funny examples too, and I'll just show you a couple of those. Sometimes you wonder if there really needs to be a sign. Like this sign, if it wasn't there, what's the purpose? There is none. Sometimes the message isn't really clear, as you can see at the bottom, and the bridge is out ahead. So really, is that sign conveying the message it really needs to? Yeah, it's got a big caution on the top of it. But, and sometimes they're somewhat confusing, although this maybe could be in Yankton this year while we're in the while we're in the interim. Maybe this sign did need a little more explanation to be effective. So talking about the purpose, ensure the signs are installed in a safe manner, sight lines and construction methods. We've talked a little bit about that in previous discussions about signs in the right-of-way and sight lines at driveways and things like that, and making sure things are safe. And we have some signs that are actually permitted that and are legal and appropriately placed, but still when you come up to the intersection, they might not quite feel comfortable. But they're there and they meet all the requirements, but some of where a few of those are too. And some of those have been removed recently with new developments, but promote efficient communication, limit size to appropriate understandable volumes. Monster billboards downtown probably isn't a great idea. And again, back to that aesthetics factor, preserving the quality of the landscape to enhance the community image and protect economic value. So back to the goals of the rewrite, just to touch on a few things. Streamlining the permit process with exemptions, and that was a big thing we heard from the business community back then was, we don't want to have to come in and get a permit for everything. So the answer to that was come up with something that's easily identifiable as you're walking or driving down the street that we can just exempt. So trying not to get too tied into dimensions. We came up with signs that would be exempt would be construction company signs. You know, this place is under construction. There's another construction company sign at a location where there's a roofing project. That would be exempt. Realtor signs, technically under the private ordinance, every single time a sign went up for a house for sale, they should have come in and gotten a permit. Did all those, you know, administratively, did we chase all those down? I'll be the first to admit, no, we didn't. So here you are kind of leaning into the content thing a little bit, but trying not to based on federal case law. In certain specific streetscapes where there is no private property in front of businesses like Main Street, maybe A-frames or T-stand type of signs like these, as long as ADA as accessibility is provided for on the sidewalk, maybe those would be okay, and that was decided then that those would be exempt also. Those are supposed to be daily, not out perpetually. That looks a little familiar. Fan or booster club signs, you got golfers and you got coyotes and rabbits living next to each other. So those things, you know, signs like this, if they were within 10 feet of the structure, were considered exempt. Otherwise, technically, a sign like that would have had to have gotten a permit, you know, 20 years ago. Yeah, banners that are essentially on the side of a building or right next to the side of a building were considered to be exempt. So signs like that and that would consider to be exempt. Second goal of the rewrite was to reduce some of the less desirable signs to improve the image of the community, and that was a pretty big emphasis at the time. So signs that folks that scored really low on our visual preference survey were things like this. One of the things that really came out of that discussion was the use of T-posts for installation methods and trying to get away from that. Signs like that, where that kind of approaches the clutter discussion in a couple of different types of signs. Signs like that, where it seems oversized for the space it has, and it's also, that one probably is partially in right of way, and the anchoring methods aren't aesthetically appropriate. This was one of the biggest discussions we had, was the difficult thing with banners just between T-posts is, you know, we have a little bit of wind here sometimes, so trying to keep those maintained, and if they were allowed, how do you make it so they would still function? Whip banners or feather banners, these are technically in ordinance defined as banners also. Yeah, I don't even know how to describe that. We got a banner stretched between poles and then a couple of sheets of OSB with some things stapled to it. Trailer signs, if you try and define an appropriate trailer sign where the wheels can or can't show, it's almost impossible to administer. So the determination was that trailer signs, the wheel and hitch wouldn't be able to show. Banners strung at distance between anchor sites. These sorts of signs are easy because that's in the right of way. That just technically can't be there to begin with. So that's one of those instances where we would just pick it up and bring it down to City Hall and try and contact the folks and offer that they'd be able to come down and get it. And the third thing was modernizing the language. Electronic message signs were kind of the big thing coming into play 2008 through 2013, and that's where the representative from ISA really helped us out the most and got us definitions for lumens, and we even have a meter now that we can utilize, and we have types of colors and things that are appropriate or not. You're not supposed to have like a red flashing sign because somebody can look in their rear view mirror and think that it's law enforcement that they need to pull over for or something. So electronic message signs were a pretty big part of that discussion. And those need to dim automatically also, auto dimming features, so that when the sun goes down they don't stay blindingly bright like they need to be at a productive level during the daytime. Okay, sorry for the really wordy slide here. We were asked at the time if the new draft of the ordinance was adopted and you were to drive down the street in Yankton a couple of years from now, what would look different than it did in 2012? So as far as new permanent signs, like pillar signs or wall-mounted signs on storefronts, there would be no change. Those provisions didn't change, sizes didn't decrease, square footage allowances didn't decrease, so they would look the same, no change. Banners were, the new ordinance would move them back closer to the principal permitted structure or occupancy, and we try to give folks as much leeway as possible in the administration of that. Those can sometimes get to be a little bit of a judgment call at times. So that trying to improve the streetscape of the aesthetics in our transportation corridors. And as I'll show you some pictures here soon. And signs on trailers were specifically discussed at that point in time as something that if some of them were allowed, how do you determine what is of quality and appropriate to be okay? And so they were not permitted. However, you can take a trailer sign and construct it in such a manner. We call it skirting, but typically it's a hardboard material. It can be a fabric material to visually transform that sign into when it's providing user-friendly guidance about the sign ordinance. Is that my feedback, or am I hearing things? You know, we try and just ask people or make sure people know that if they just give us a call before they put something up, we'll be happy to provide them guidance, and we'll even meet them on site or whatever and talk about it. When non-compliant sign is discovered, again, call and try to educate prior to taking any sort of formal compliance action. There are misconceptions, and that's caused in large part by legal processes involved depending on the circumstances. And it's not just with signs, but with code enforcement, it's the same way. You know, like if you're talking about grass height and somebody calls about their neighbor's lawn being too high, and we give the neighbor a call, they mow their grass the next day, and people are extremely happy about that because, you know, it got taken care of right away with a phone call. Well, sometimes that person might not mow their grass for a week, and then sometimes folks will think that we're selectively enforcing it because we didn't make that other person mow it for a week. Well, by the time you start initiating a legal compliance order process, it takes way more time than that anyway. So we continue to try and work through the education aspect of it. Yeah, if compliance is gained with a phone call, it's a matter of minutes or hours or a couple days. If not, then it's a different process. And processes, this is really important to remember when it comes to signs, processes are dramatically different if the sign's on private property than if the signs are in the right of way. So if it's in the right of way, we'll still call people if they're, you know, not a regular that has offended on a number of occasions or something. We'll still call people and try and say, hey, you know, if you don't get that sign, we're gonna have to come pick it up. If it's some issue where there's safety concerns, then or if it's an issue at a location where we've been in contact with them on a number of times, it's the same thing as mowing, where we'll just go pick them up and bring them down to City Hall and give people a call and say, and here are your signs, if you want to come get them, and then talk to them about where they can be. If the sign's on private property, it's an entirely different process. We do not enter private property and pull signs or place them anywhere in any manner. If it's a private property sign, there's a whole different process where we still call them and contact them. Then there's a compliance order that might involve a written notification, and that's where we start to involve Ross at that point, city attorney at that point, and that process takes longer. So I think one of the misconceptions on selective enforcement is that if there's something that's obviously non-compliant out there and we get a call about it, and the business owner says, oh yeah, I'll take care of that, they take care of it right away, and then the next one, it might be not quite as friendly of a discussion. And so the sign might be sitting there non-compliant for a week or more while we're in the middle of a compliance order. Then some folks think that the second the latter is somehow receiving preferential treatment because they had a sign out of compliance longer. It's part of just the legal process. The absolute most difficult situations that I'm happy to say don't occur very often are when somebody installs something without checking the ordinance. One thing I want to be sure to mention is that can be dangerous because a lot of the times, I'm not just talking sight lines for access for transportation, but a lot of the times the right-of-way or the front yard setback also has a significant amount of utilities in them. So if somebody's out there driving a T-post, even into their own front yard setback, they could hit utilities, power lines, fiber optics lines. A lot of that stuff you drive by every day down the street, you would not believe. I can show you some street sections that are so full there's nowhere to go with anything else, just a few feet under the ground down to whatever the water and sewer utility depths are. Another difficult situation occurs once in a while when somebody has, before we talk to them, has already decided on a non-compliant type of sign and they're not willing to discuss compliant alternatives, so those conversations aren't fine. And then we do end up with some folks that, just like with code enforcement, with lawn mowing and things like that, that's part of our job, but some folks kind of aren't very nice. I'll just leave it at that. So let's look at some examples. Yankton's current streetscape as compared to other communities in the state. So here's a streetscape at Yankton, and there on the right is an example of a compliant trailer sign. So that is skirted appropriately so you can't see the wheels or hitch. And the grassed front area there is compliant, and the right-of-way doesn't have any signs. So there's your streetscape green corridor. We have instances like in this case where somebody was trying to develop a design for a compliant trailer sign, and they actually called us to their shop to say, hey, is this compliant now if I use this trailer sign? And they had used hardboard to frame out around the trailer tires. This would not be in Yankton. This is the type of sign that is not compliant in Yankton. In Yankton, Hy-Vee, you can see the corridors there. Not in Yankton. In Yankton, and this is a good example of an instance where a temporary sign permit was pulled for that sign on the right in the grass, and it has T-posts in there, but they were sheathed appropriately so that it is aesthetically, it meets the sign code. It's not just a banner strung between T-posts, and it's a hardboard also, so it's not going to blow around in the wind. This is what we used to see a lot of. That's not in Yankton. Here's an instance where there's a lot of signage on the property, but it's all placed appropriately and not out in the grass or the right-of-way. Not in Yankton. Lots of signs in that picture, but permanent signs that are appropriate for the size of the space, but the front yard setbacks are clear. Not in Yankton with the whip banners out in front. In Yankton, a car lot, a lot of people think of car lots as not being that attractive. This one has some landscaping and appropriate signage. That's in Yankton. That's what we used to see prior to the current ordinance. That's not in Yankton. Closing thoughts, I tried to leave you as much time as possible. I told Amy I'd try and get this done in 35 minutes, and it looks like I'm going to get it. Based on the guidance provided by the community in that 20-year time frame between the comp plan and implementation schedule and the rewrite of the ordinance, and then many of you, as you know, have had this subject come up off and on, and we've had a public appearance or an agenda item to discuss whether or not it was time to consider a different language. I think the community can be proud of the results of the ordinance changes that were made. We regularly hear compliments from officials from other communities, and they've used our ordinances as a model for their codes also. And the visual difference is obvious, as you just saw. So if changes are proposed, I would recommend that it be well thought out, a thorough process of community engagement, maybe similar to what it was in the past. We do have a comp plan process coming up here the next 18 months or so. We got to make sure to not write any any provisions of a code that would be opposed or in opposition to what federal case law and state case laws has determined, or, that we can regulate. Also, this is hard to describe, but I'll try and give you some context. The administration of the ordinance with available resources needs to be considered. So when we went from the old code to the new code, I kind of mentioned it's pretty easy to see when you drive down the street right now through those exemptions, making it easier for the business owners what is and what is not compliant almost at a first glance. Rarely do you have to, does our staff have to turn around and go back and try and see if they need a tape measure to figure something out or all that. So that was really an important discussion that occurred at the time. And the other thing is just spacing and timing. So in the past we had different, like a certain sign could be out for 7 days, a certain sign could be out for 75 days. We still have some of that at this point, but it's tied to events. So like an election, you can start putting your election signs out 75 days before your election. If we tried to tie different types of signs to like a 7-day window or a 10-day window, you'd have to almost go back to requiring permits for those signs so you could have a tracking method of when it went in. So it couldn't be exempt is what I'm trying to say, which would be a burden on the property owner to have to try and get permits for things like that. So 31 minutes later, I'll let you have your discussion. I might move, unless you want me to flip, I can take this with me. I might move over there so I can write down notes. A little easier, and I'll take this with me if you need me to flip back to some slides.
Thanks for that, Dave. Very informative in how we got where we are, because I know I, for one, wasn't on the commission when you went through all of this. So I appreciate you going through that. Are there, who wants to start us off? Questions from the commission, or where do we want to start on this? Oh, Commissioner Hunoff.
So how does our ordinance compare to the other, let's say, 12 biggest cities? Would you say ours is similar to the others or more stringent?
Well, as far as our streetscapes, we have fewer signs than the others. The temporary signs, the banners, we have fewer of those, fewer trailer signs. So yes, it is, aesthetics were deemed to be a goal, and that's the first thing I tell people when they call about banners is Yankton is more restrictive than many other communities. Communities are trending in our direction.
Dave, what are the most common issues that are brought up regarding our sign ordinance? I'm thinking we've had questions about the trailer signs in the past. There's the whip signs. Are there common themes that you're hearing when people do have issues with it?
So the method of installation, and folks, just because it's easy, really like the banner stretched between T-posts. There's a way to actually do that that's compliant if you hardboard it and you cover the posts. You can get pretty innovative with how you cover a post, whether it's PVC or we've even had people using swimming noodles or something like that to cover their post and technically be compliant with the ordinance. And the other thing is that hardboard so that it's not whipping and dancing.
Dave, do you know, have there been studies that you've seen that, I'm curious, and you might not be able to answer off the fly. I guess I'm thinking about for myself. So how effective having these signs out really are for businesses? I say that because when I go to another community, I'm not looking at signs to tell me where to go to eat or buy. I'm Googling that on my phone. I'm looking it up on my phone either ahead of time, on my computer. I can't even honestly think of a time that a sign in a right-of-way or anything like that has dictated my behavior. So I'm just curious if we know of any studies that have been done on how effective they are.
So I don't have a ready reference for you, but I do know, I'd be very confident in saying that you will see arguments on both sides of that issue that are quite extensive. the finding in the comp plan was that having a aesthetically, pleasing streetscape was of utmost importance for economic development and promoting value in the community. That was the finding of that process. I'm 100% sure you can find findings to the contrary that say that, banners and streamers are extremely helpful.
Sir, I'm going to ask you either to go to the microphone and be recognized by the commission. We record these meetings. Thank you. Sorry. Feel free to go up to a podium if you have something to say, and I'll recognize you here, but I do want to see if other commissioners have questions.
I guess I could, I use signs a lot in my business, and, for example, an open house, some people go because they see it posted online, but others are driving down the street and just happen to see the sign or the balloons tied to the sign or something that draws them in. So I do see that signs have a purpose outside of Google, knowing where you're going already. So I can see the argument of why there's a need for a special event type of sign or a sale sign or something of those purposes, because you are trying to draw their attention, that catch those that may not even know they're out to look for something, but they happen to see it.
Right, and according to Dave, real estate and things like that are exempt, and that makes sense, because I think people are driving around. I can tell you I did find a house going to Burger King once, so.
And I think real estate is exempt, but, for retail businesses too, it's, you might be driving down and see a banner outside Ace Hardware, and like, oh, hey, actually, I'm going to stop at Ace and get popcorn. I might actually buy something there too, right? It causes you to want to stop for some reason. So I do see the value of good signage to draw people in.
Sure.
Quick question, Dave. How often would you say that you've picked up signs that are not in compliance? Is there quite a big sign boneyard, or is it pretty bare?
So those instances are always in the right of way, because that's the only time that we pick them up, and that's every week. There's some, and yeah, we have the garage at City Hall that's got some signs in it, and if we come back with them, and we immediately try and track down the owner and have them stop by and pick them up, because we don't want them or have a purpose for them, and then we have a discussion with them then about how they can a lot of times they can use the same sign, it just has to be placed on their property or closer to their building, it can't be out in the right of way. So there's some every week.
Okay,
That's
thank you.
fair to say. A little more during election season.
Sure.
Yeah. And is there a shelf life on those? Do we only hold for 60, 90 days, or?
Technically, I suppose we could legally dispose of them at a certain point, but we try and be as, hang in there with people as long as we can until there's something that's obviously been in there for a year or so, and then it's discarded. Most of those signs aren't very large investments. They're not too fancy, stick in the ground sorts of election signs.
All right, I don't see any other, oh, yep, go ahead.
Sometimes, certain times of the year, I think 4th of July, Riverboat Days, you'll see out on Broadway these businesses that are selling political signs that can be patriotic and also profane. And I'm wondering how those fit under our ordinance.
Way, and this has happened recently, we can have them and the person addressed by the police department. So we can actually pick them up. And I know Ross is going to chime in on this too, but yeah, we cannot regulate based on content. There are some provisions for obscenities, but that's subjective at a certain point too. So I don't know if you want to weigh in on that, Ross. We have taken compliance action against that sort of thing on several occasions in the last few years.
Yeah, we have one kind of regular offender's not the right word I would use, but someone who regularly thumbs his nose at our ordinances, and each time he comes around, there's some kind of interaction he has with the city to either bring him into compliance or he will leave.
Other commission questions? Sorry, I am getting to the public, but I usually tend
no, it's
to do
okay.
the commission first to make
But-
sure we get our questions in.
Ross, specifically in that instance, though, that's because he or she is in the right of way, correct?
Usually, there's other aspects of it, but it generally involves having the permission of the property owner or being in the right of way. And generally, the instruction is, as long as you have the consent of the property owner and you are on private property, we'll generally leave you alone, but that doesn't always go down very well.
Okay. Trespassing has come into play with that, because that, in some of those instances, the setup has been on somebody's private property that the person never talked to, and they would prefer them not to be there also.
Other questions from the commission? Not that you can't continue to ask before I open it up to the public. All right. Please state your name.
My name's Clint Brockmuller. Actually, one of the images that, excuse me, I'm having a Dave had shown was actually my parking lot that I manage on Claim Freight Furniture here in town. So, and I'm try to expedite things. I've got a few comments I want to make about it. One of the, you asked about the effectiveness of signs and banners. And the company I work for is corporate out of Sioux Falls. We own 57 stores throughout Minneapolis, Sioux Falls, North Dakota, Iowa. And I will tell you, I work with our ad team closely. It is pretty significant, the effect that, and it's not that we put them out all the time, but on occasion, and we'll kind of get where I would say if we're going to compromise on some things, because I have some theories on, or some thoughts on how I don't like the ordinance itself based on aesthetic appeal, because desirability is subjective in itself. And when we talk about content, again, subjective. So that leaves a gray area. But I will say that for our company, banners, the whip flags are very successful, especially when used at certain events. So, we were talking about the timeframe's hard to say, well, you can only have it out for 7 days. And that's tough, because that would require a permit. I agree, that would be very difficult. But a recommendation on how to make it easier, because generally these are retail business, service businesses, and when do they run their promotions? Generally around your holidays, your Labor Day, your Memorial Day, your 4th of July, your New Year's, those events. Is it possible that we make an exception to that ordinance based on 7 days prior, 7 days after, making it something where you don't need a permit, and it's very easy to determine whether they're in violation of the ordinance, because it's a week after Memorial Day, it's a week after Labor Day, that shouldn't be up anymore. That would be I think an acceptable, and reasonable agreement that the businesses around town would make. And I've spent a lot of time over the last month talking to a lot of business owners. I bet you I've spoken to over 50 business owners in this town. And 99.9% of them do not like the fact that they cannot promote their business with a whip flag, a banner, a sign temporarily for promoting events. So I can tell you, you can take a study of 48 people in a town of 15,000, and if you ask the right questions, you ask them the right way, you ask the right people, you're going to get the desired outcome you're looking for. And I can assure you that's the case with almost everything. So, you want to be very cautious on how those polls turn out, because it's not just about what the question is, it's about how you ask it and who you're asking. So that would be my recommendation, but I can say that our banners, signs are very, very effective. And in the past, when I put them up before I knew there was an ordinance, we had very good results from them. So, yeah, I just thought I'd include that for you.
So any other questions, comments from commissioners?
Are whip signs forbidden totally, or does it depend on proximity to the right-of-way?
Proximity to the primary occupancy. So they are defined as a banner, and they would need to be back by the building. We've allowed some flexibility if there's an occupancy that still is part of the primary occupancy of the property, but it might be temporary in nature, like a food truck or something that has whip banners. That So if something's out in the parking lot when Hy-Vee has their, their sale where they got all their vegetation or whatever, can there be a banner on the side of that? As a staff administratively, we've determined that that's an occupied structure. It's not just a sign sitting out there. There's people in it. They're buying things and selling things. And so at that point in time, that's part of the primary occupancy of that site. So we've tried to be a little bit flexible with that, more so than if it's just a banner out there unattended and it isn't part of the occupancy.
Dave, in your recommendations, you've suggested that if we were to make changes, we go through a robust process like we did with the original ordinance, and I agree with that recommendation. The question I have is, what would that look like if we were going to do it sooner than the comprehensive planning process? Because we have that process coming up, and I think it makes sense to do it during that, but if there's some sense of urgency to this where individuals weren't wanting to wait that long, have you given thought to what that process?
Yeah, I mean, we've done different types of open houses for different subjects beyond just what was included in the comprehensive plan. So I would think that would mean some sort of open house scenario where you can present visuals. I don't know if that means another visual preference survey. I would think that would mean, obviously, to get an ordinance like that, it would be 2 planning commission and 2 city commission meetings, so there'd be time there too. You're not going to, unless you wait for the comp plan, you're not going to end up with that visual city chapter input sort of, breadth of discussion. But yeah, and it's the commission's decision too. If there's something that you and the community want to change in the shorter term, that can happen. But I would ask very sincerely that we consider in detail what that sort of change would mean from an enforcement or administrative standpoint, because to me, the big step back, if there's a change, would be getting back to the unwieldy situation we had before, where we basically our hands were tied because you couldn't keep up with the non-permitted signs, and that's why we did all the exemptions. So whatever language that would come to fruition, I would say if there is any changes, get it vetted through a full process that includes legal review and allow staff some time to run some scenarios and have those discussions with you too.
I see Matt Evans out in the audience. Were you going to speak on this, or are you just here listening? You don't have to. I'm just wondering.
Oh, look, time's up. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I hate wasting.
I am just kidding you, Matt.
But I hate wasting your guys' time, and I think Clint did a great job. I think there's a lot of things that we don't know about. I think if we had some visual pictures from both sides, like examples that Clint has or examples that I have, that maybe some exceptions can be made. For instance, like the mall, I believe David's 2 feet away for like the whips or banners and stuff from a building. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. There are other alternatives for temporary signs, though.
Yeah.
But yeah, for whips or banners, that's correct.
For instance, if I wanted to do any whips or banners, say at the mall, they would be extremely ineffective because it's a 21-acre lot and I'm, 100 yards from Broadway, but I still own frontage all the way up to Broadway. So if I did want to do whips or banners of any sort, they have to be 2 feet away, and it just doesn't work. I think even Clint said something along the lines of he can't do that because of concrete or something. Yeah, sorry.
He caught me turning my mic on again, didn't you, Clint?
So I got in trouble last time, Matt, so.
It's only because we're recording and it's hard for the public to hear people in the seats.
I get it. The 2 foot is just ineffective. I mean, a sidewalk is 36 inches. I have 36 inches of sidewalk in front of my building. I can't even go to the end of the sidewalk. That's just, and what I'm looking at is more of what are we trying to do? What are we trying to prevent? Well, we're trying to keep everybody safe. We're trying to keep things from being blocked. Yes, aesthetics has somewhat of an impact, but should not be the basis of the purview of a government to determine what looks good and what doesn't. And I understand the people are part of that government, but you got to take into account people's livelihood as well. These businesses are trying to make a living and trying to promote their business and trying to keep business flowing in Yankton, which therefore also pays tax revenue to Yankton and also helps us to be able to afford some of the nice things we have here. And so that's a fine line you walk. You got to decide what's best for the business, but what's also best for the city. I read the sign ordinance, the portion we're talking about today, and I've read it multiple times before, but I wanted to read over it again. And some of the language in here is about, they're trying to protect businesses from having too much clutter and a confusion. I have it in here, but it says, if there are too many signs in the area, then an existing business owner may have difficulty conveying a simple message to customers. That's not no offense to you guys, that's not up to you to decide on what's confusing from a business operator or owner's decision to create a buzz for their business. So that's just some of the things that I think is just a little bit too much. I personally, if I were to make a change, and I understand that most of the business owners I've talked to would like to make a big change, but you're going to have to concede and you're going to have to also compromise. And one of the things I think that I wouldn't want to compromise is the fact that I want to be able to put a sign or banner or flag out temporarily that would not block view. So instead of being 2 feet off the building, be 10 or 15 feet from any intersection or roadway. And that would not block any view of anything for anybody. So look at it from a different perspective instead of from the building, because everybody's building is a different distance away. I mean, you go down Broadway, there's buildings right next to it. My best friend owns Stewart Carpet. He could put a banner out 2 feet and it's effective. I can put a banner out 2 feet, not effective. So it's every business is going to be different. Matt has a mall that he's going to have businesses in. We all want to see that successful. And we all do. Yankton wants to see it successful. Wants more businesses to come. So we need him to do well to create that buzz around that. So the 2 feet from the building, I think, is something that we really does need to be changed. And I would love to see some sort of if it's temporary, if we're going to something that's going to take longer to make a permanent decision on this, something that will temporarily help right now with the economy's tough. Businesses are tough. I mean, from real estate to retail, it's all difficult right now. So anything we can do to keep people here in Yankton shopping and not driving past and going to Sioux Falls, Sioux City. Because the perception to buy online, the perception to go to a bigger city and get a better deal on something, whatever it may be, is a real thing. So if we can say, hey, we're here, don't leave. And I think it's worth making maybe a temporary change while we get a final decision made on everything. So, sorry, Matt, I didn't mean to
one more
your stuff here.
Quick question, gentlemen. I know you said there was 23 people that you had signed a petition or a list.
I don't have that list with me, but I think it was 23 or 28, somewhere around there. That was just from Menards to 19th Street.
Okay, and the reason I asked that or make this point is that I want to thank you both for being here, because that's why we have these work sessions, is to get feedback from our community, and without getting that extra feedback, we wouldn't have had this work session. But I will say thank you to you both for being here, because if there's just 23 from that little stretch of roadway you told us, and there's only 2 of you here, that we're missing a lot of feedback. And we even gave extra time to make sure that we had extra time to hear everybody's, because some of the feedback we've had before is we didn't have enough time at a work session. And that's why we're doing what we're doing, is to make sure that we're listening.
And I appreciate all of you for listening. And it's, and I thought about continuing on my mission to get more signatures. I have a busy life as well, a lot of stuff going on. So, and I'm happy to get more feedback from people about it and show you data that would show that the businesses in Yankton need to have the ability to promote. And it's, if we were talking, a bigger city, I get this stuff is not as important. I mean, bigger cities, Yankton's, if there's anything the furniture world has taught me, that we're a couple years behind the trends of other cities. We still do have a newspaper. We still do have print ads that come out. Those still are actually very effective here. I've had to fight my own advertising team who's gone away from the print ads, the mailers, things like that, to still have them. Because they're just not effective in Minneapolis or in Sioux Falls, where they're still effective here. So, we need to keep that in mind, that people are still visual here. We like a little more laid back and not as fast tempo. I think that's all why we love Yankton a little bit. But I think if you want some more feedback, I'd be happy to provide it for future discussion with it.
Well, I appreciate that very much, but also, I guess my point was too, is I wish there was more of those people on that list here now.
I agree.
To give us that feedback.
I agree. And I considered inviting some of them here, but I didn't, this is my first go around in something like this.
Yep.
So I didn't know what that would do
Yep.
or how that would look.
Well, again, thank you both for being here.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Matt Evans. I can sit here and talk for another half hour if you want me to. I think the main thing is what I get from Clint and this whole situation is, like, every business is different, and Yankton being on Highway 81 is a pass-through town. So we need to, however we do it, whether it's changing the ordinance or whatever, to show people as they're coming through from Nebraska to North Dakota or vice versa, is show them that Yankton is open for business. And I do like the fact that we do it nice, and I didn't like the looks of those trailers, to be honest. So if we can do it a different way, like, I do like the whip signs. I think they look good. Those new blow-up ones that kind of flail around, I think those catch attention and those look pretty nice, as long as they're temporary, so it's not out there and all torn up for a month or 2 months or a year, whatever. I think he's got great ideas as far as temporary during holidays, because that is most of the time the sales and stuff like that. And I think a discussion would be, and I understand tonight, was meant to be that, and it's tough because there's nobody here, but I think if there's another discussion in the future, if we can plan to have a lot more businesses here to do that and have some visuals and some good feedback, like saying, well, this is the problem I have, or this is what looks good. I think Dave's visuals that he had up there were great, what we don't want and what we do want. So yeah.
Is there anybody else in the public that wants to address the commission in relation to this topic? All right. Anybody else on the commission, after some discussion, have other thoughts or questions?
I've got a quick question that regards Matt. At the mall, there's a couple of permanent signs there that there's different things that'll be on them. The Taylor Swift was on that. That's the one that I'm thinking of, that was on Broadway and on 21st Street. Of that, what I'm trying to figure out, like, how much of that is allowable? Like,
so that goes back to what Dave was saying as far as having the covered posts. It had to have the covered posts on it. It had to have the backing on it. It had to be secured. It can't be flailing around. So, like, as the pictures that he showed, some of them were laying down and ripped or whichever, which I agree don't look good at all. So I got my permit from the city And they told me exactly what I had to do, and it worked out great, and it was great for advertisement. One thing I will say, because I didn't know it at first until I talked to, is it Michael? No. Yeah, so I talked to Michael down there, and so for years, there's always been in the front on the Broadway side where the Taylor Swift one is now, there used to be a banner there, and it was advertisement for the mall, and it said DP Management on it. So that was actually acceptable, and it was just a banner without a backing, and the reason why was because realtors can have those temporary signs. Am I wrong, Dave? I think that's what Michael said. He said something along the lines of realtors had certain exceptions, so DP Management owning the building was allowed to put that out there, like rental spaces available. Well, like I can't do that because I'm not a realtor, basically. So it was kind of a gray area there.
Some part of what happened in that discussion, and that's one of those instances where I'd be happy to do some research and let the commission know. But there shouldn't be any banners, whether it's a realtor or not. There shouldn't be any banners with T-posts displayed.
Yeah.
But seems like there's always more to what's going on than that. And that owner, and I'll say it in public, was an extremely poor actor in this community for a long time. And so we might have had an ongoing compliance action for years.
The previous owner.
Right, yeah, that owner.
The previous
That other owner prior to the current owner.
Well, either way, I worked with them, and we got it figured out, and we sold some Taylor Swift tickets. So, still available if anybody's looking.
I guess the question that I have probably is for you, Dave, is with those, how many of those are allowable on a property? Is that tied to square footage? Is it tied to?
So if they're exempt, there's no measurement associated with it, and that goes back to. Sorry, I'm going to do this to you, just because it seems easier to deal with visuals. If we didn't exempt window signs and wall signs and include in the calculation the pylon sign there, this property would have too many square footage of signs, but those are all exempt types of signs. So if it's an exempt sign, like temporary signs that are appropriate, trailer signs, there can be a significant number of them if their manner of installation is correct. But those do require, the ones that are a temporary sign, technically, they do require a permit. But the banners do not. So there could be whip banners covering this entire side of this building within 2 feet of the building and be compliant.
All right, but with permit, so the sign that Matt has on the mall right now, what would be the limitations of like how many of those signs could you have?
Temporary signs?
Well, like this Taylor Swift sign that I'm just talking about. So it has the T-posts, it has covering over the T-posts, and then it has plywood or it's a hard backer on that sign.
Sure. So there is a square footage max for permanent signage on the property, and that includes pylon signs and signs on the building. There isn't a square foot max for temporary signage or exempt signage. But again, you're starting to reach over into territory where I need to rely on Brad and Michael's input a little more because they're in the daily administration.
I'm just trying to figure out where that sign falls in. That sign falls in under permitted?
So it's called temporary.
That's temporary.
So there's a difference between exempt, temporary, and permanent.
Okay.
So those are.
I was saying permitted I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yep, but that's permitted. And so that, in that instance, it can essentially be a banner on hardboard with the appropriate posts, and that installation is reviewed and permitted.
Okay.
So Dave, I think you're doing a great job. I think staff's doing a great job. I think our city looks really clean, really nice the way things are now. But if you go back to where you just were with, that's okay. So what my point's going to be is that I do see these gentlemen's concerns about, like right here, I don't know what the distance is from the curb to the building, but it's way closer than it would be for, the mall and or the furniture store. And so I can see the point too, is if the whip banner is 2 feet from the building and the whip banner is doing its job, it's probably hitting the building being 2 feet from the building. And if potentially it's even if there's a sidewalk across the front of the building, then it's probably in the 3-foot sidewalk itself.
So the discussion at that time, and this might sound slightly negative, but the discussion at that time was those businesses they chose to build their buildings or purchase buildings that were located where they are. There's provisions in the ordinance that those buildings could have been much closer to the roadway. So that's a decision that's made through time, how site plans are compliant with the zoning ordinance as far as setbacks are concerned. Is that fair when it comes to the sign ordinance? That's a discussion for you guys in the community to have. But that was the reference at that point in time, was those property owners chose to put that building where it is. So that was how that decision was made.
I guess one of the points that I was trying to get at with the temporary sign was there are avenues for temporary signs that are further out. We're having these discussions over whip signs and that are 2 feet, but there are ways that you can have temporary signs that are closer to your frontage road. It may not be a whip banner, but it can be either a trailer sign or, pardon me, the sign like what Matt has. And it's even across the board, so everyone is underneath the same rules. I don't know. I'm trying to hear everyone's viewpoints on things, but I'm also trying to balance. Balance folks that we put this in place years ago, and it has worked pretty well. I mean, nothing is perfect, but I do see that there are ways to get signage out closer to the street. But it's certain types of signs, but it's certain types of signs for everyone also. So I guess I'm inclined to leave it as it is, and have folks that are looking to do signs that are close to the roadways to use the rules of the game as they are right now, unless I hear some uproar within the community that is looking for something else. But so far, I haven't gotten that uproar from folks. So I guess that's my viewpoint. I just wanted to, state it and find out more about the sign that was at the mall.
Jerry, I know sometimes when we're online, it's difficult to get the microphone to discuss anything. So I wanted to check with you to see if you had any questions or any comments.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I appreciate that. I've been giving this a lot of thought, and I remember when we went through this process years ago, and I remember at the time recognizing how it was very important to the people involved in this process that we maintain a tidy appearance for our community. And when I think about some of the other communities that I've been to in South Dakota and outside of South Dakota, and having a lot of signs up can make it look really messy. And I also think about how this would add to staff load already. So it's my feeling that I would welcome a process of hearing from the community But personally, I'm not in favor of changing it.
All right, thank you for that, Commissioner Weber. I just wanted to make sure you had a chance to speak. So far I've heard from 2 commissioners. Are there any other commissioners with direction that we want to give the city on this besides what's been shared?
My 2 cents would be, I think I don't think that the one size fits all mentality is always correct. But I don't disagree. I think what we're doing now seems to work. I do wish there was more people. There were more people here tonight to speak. But I do welcome the ongoing discussion, and the process comes at a cost. And I know Commissioner Johnson talked about that. And so I think maybe it's something that we revisit when we get further down the road for our planning. But I do think it's maybe something that we still should have a discussion on at some point.
Dave, walk us through what is kind of the timeline for looking at this. Did you mention a couple of years, or we're going to be reviewing in a couple of years, or?
So I would hope, thankfully, the comp planning process has more recently been taking less time than it did the last time we did a plan. So I would think that that's a 12 to 14 month process once you get your planning consultant on board. So that's where we're at right now. I've got an RFP that you'll be seeing shortly, and we're kind of running into the holidays here, so that as much as I wish it wouldn't, it does kind of impact a little bit the timing of publications and availability for review teams and things like that. So hopefully we can get that going the beginning of next year and finish it up within 12 months, maybe 14.
I would just jump in and say, given the extensive process in 2013 that the city went through with commission, with planning commission, with community members, I'm not eager to jump in and just start making changes. I think the community made that decision together in 2013, and so I think it would be important for us to work together moving forward. And there may be some things that we want to change, but I think it needs to be a larger conversation and a more extensive one.
So I think that Amy's points were well taken, but my concern is retail, food service, other, high traffic businesses right now are, I don't want to see them struggle. I'd rather see them be successful. And on the same token, how can we do that? That's more of a compromise to what we already have, and go along with that planning process that might be 18 months out. What if we could implement a test case scenario, implementing a compromise that Clint maybe suggested, where a few days before or after a major holiday, we identify what those are, focusing on the safety aspect, limited in duration and scope of what signs can and can't be used, but just easy for staff to administer. They have to be gone within a certain amount of time, days after the holiday. But it would allow us to see how it's functioning prior to that planning process and community function. Say, do you like what's going on? Do you like what happened on July 4th? Do you like what happened with Labor Day? And when we get to that planning process, we can say, we really didn't like that. Or, we're okay with that. I just worry that if we don't do something sooner, we might hurt our own businesses in town, and we don't want to see that happen.
Other thoughts from the commission?
I would support that.
And I should add, I think that if we do go down this road, we would need to come up with a pretty good process and writing of, with Ross's help and deciding how we would want to implement something. But I would be in favor of just trying to support something like this.
I guess one thing that I'd like to know about that is what is it that we would be allowing? That would be something that I would want to know before was able to make any decision on it. Again, going back to this temporary signs, being able, there are ways to have that out by the road. So I guess it would come down to, what things are we looking to give a I suppose, a variance to, a holiday variance to. I'd like to know what those things would be. It would be, I'd be willing to have the discussion, but would reserve holding off as far as what I would have as judgment based upon what it is that we were talking about opening up.
Are there, obviously, we're not making a decision tonight, as we all know with a work session, but I guess I'm just trying to get a better gauge. So I've had a couple commissioners say leave as is, a couple commissioners who've agreed to say maybe a test case might be okay to at least talk about. So as we move forward, and we're going into like fall and winter, which getting anything in the ground or anything probably stable is, so I guess I'm seeing this as maybe after the first of the year, or, late winter-ish, if this was going to be something we talked about.
Yeah, I would think the upcoming holiday season is probably out of the question. It's just not going to happen. But if we could have a test case scenario ready for maybe by middle of the summer so that it could run through July 4th, Labor Day, Thanksgiving, Christmas of next year to see, and then getting into that planning, 18 months down the road, getting the planning work done to see if we like it or don't like it. We don't know with that. It's working, our community is beautiful now, but can we help our businesses and keep the community beautiful at the same time?
Mechanically, we're talking about a test case. I'm assuming we're talking about maybe experimenting with what we have on the books, so to speak. And essentially what that would require is still a change to the existing ordinance. We can't just hit the pause button. So what you need to be thinking about as a commission is how you're going to craft that as an ordinance. And I think the way that makes sense to me would be to craft an ordinance that sunsets back to what we had before if you don't get in and change it. Just because you can't just say, all right, we're going to hit the pause and we're going to try something a little bit different here for the next few months. It's a little more complicated than that. But we just have to think about it methodically, understanding that changing takes time. We have the first and second readings after it's crafted in a way that you guys like, and it's going to require some foresight and planning.
If we would do that, I know Dave has mentioned before, like the planning commission's involved, the city commission's involved. If we're looking at, I guess, for lack of a better term, Commissioner Schramm called a test case, does that go through all of those entities as well? Or is that just if we're overhauling the entire ordinance?
That's an excellent question. I'm going to say at least part of it, I think, would have to, because there's a zoning aspect to our, it's not entirely zoning, but there's definitely zoning overlays.
Just for a method of managing administration and legal processes, the sign ordinance was moved from a standalone ordinance into the zoning code. And that typically involves the planning commission for a recommendation.
And that would also make it quasi-judicial, would it not, Ross?
No, it's legislative, but the process is a little more complicated and does involve the planning and zoning board.
Okay, thank you.
So then, Dave, usually how things come from the planning commission is it starts with them and then comes to the commission. Are you saying, is that the same policy here? We reverse it? It goes from us to the plan? I'm all sorts of confused.
So there's
but I want to make sure we understand the process.
Like if you do a city-initiated rezoning, that starts here, goes to the planning commission, and then comes back to you. So that's not a foreign set of steps, I guess, to planning and zoning processes in general. So if this commission wanted to develop some sort of ordinance that Ross referenced that sunsets like that, and what I would ask is that think about the type of language that would be included, and then let Ross and staff kind of figure out how that would fit administratively, and if we ended up with compliance orders, how that all works, because that's where it gets complicated. And then before you would pass it along to the planning commission and for their discussion, then that would be more or less of a public input process at that point in time. Okay, well, from the sounds of it, we have a little bit of time to put some thought
amongst us together on what that could look like, and then maybe look to have something on the city agenda late spring or so. I'm going to tell Commissioner Schramm he's in charge of thinking about some of the language he wants to propose. Sounds like he raised his hand. So does that sit well with the commission? I am getting a lot of head nods, not a formal vote, FYI. So Dave, Amy give you direction, so it sounds like right now nothing's changing, but after the first of the year or so, we'll start putting our heads together to see if there's some thoughts or ideas we have.
If that's the direction the commission chooses to go, I would say, yeah, definitely get us a list of things, and maybe if you could even include some pictures as you're driving around other communities of what you think could happen. And then it would be staff's job, your legal team's job, to take a visual that you thought would be okay for the test case and craft the ordinance language that would support that. And that's where the challenge comes, though, but that's...
Sure. That's wonderful. I would encourage the public to do that as well. This is something we've talked about, whether it comes as a test case or we look at tying it to when we go through our comprehensive plan. If you are in other communities and you see things that you think would fit well in our community, by all means, please get it to one of us as your representatives in the community, and we'd be happy to include that. We share that with others and then are able to kind of maybe get a new way to look at things. So it wouldn't just be the commission, but I would encourage the public to do that, as I know Commissioner Villanueva and others have said. Would love to hear from the public more on this. So if you're driving around and you see signs in other communities that you think look nice, that you would think would be good in our community, or other thoughts and ideas that you have, please get them to the commission, and we will make sure that we state in our agendas, and I know the P&D and folks like that are good about covering what's going to be on the agenda, but we'll make sure we give plenty of notice when this comes before the commission again. Any last parting thoughts from the commission? All right.
I've got one more.
Oh, Ross has one more.
As we ask for that input, we'd just like to remind everybody, we have constitutional rights to free speech. So the words on the sign are not what we are going after here. It is the place, the shape, the structure, the physical placement, that's what we can regulate. So just be aware of that. We can't always agree with what people put on signs. It is the regulation of the things that contain the words. So just be aware of that.
Thank you for that clarification, Ross. All right, with that, to give everybody a few minutes to take a break before our official meeting at 7 p.m. Commences. I do not have in front of me any other business in front of the City Commission as far as it relates to the work session. So with that, I would ask for a motion to adjourn the work session of October 23rd.
So moved.
I'll second Mike's motion.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor of adjourning the work session, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. And anybody abstaining? All right, we are in recess for, looks like approximately 10-ish minutes, not quite.